Welcome to the QBC podcast, where we explore new paradigms in health and science that have a meaningful impact on our day-to-day lives. I'm your host, Meredith Oak, a curious coach and mom. I started a journey to overcome chronic fatigue and found myself in a whole new quantum universe. I believe new research shouldn't stay locked away in an ivory tower, and that wisdom can be found in many places and understood by all of us. To keep in touch with this podcast, the QBC free community, our episode guide, and all the show notes, please visit qbcpod.com, qbcpod.com. Let's get together to create the future we want to live in.
Most of us living in a new paradigm frame of mind have made the decision to largely tune out the traditional media. Or if we do pay attention to it, which I do, but like just a little bit. I like to just dip in, see what's going on, but I don't let it be the boss of me, so to speak. The media is not the boss of me, and it's not the boss of you. And I think if you're listening to this podcast and podcasts like this, that you know that, or you wouldn't be here. That being said, it still very, very much influences society. And whether we fully buy into it or not, whether we abstain from it 100%, we're still living in a world that is largely framed and influenced by what the quote unquote mainstream media is doing. And this is especially apparent in the area of health and wellness and consciousness, human happiness, all of the things. There are certain areas that it seems like journalists don't want to cover, or they cover in a really negative way. And that does set the framework for the world that we live in, whether we like it or not, and whether we pay attention to it or not. So this is a topic I really wanted to get into, because especially after COVID, we all have probably very personal experiences with the media really feeling not friendly, and even at times perhaps like an enemy. So my guest today is a journalist who worked for the major newspaper in his country. He's from Sweden. And he, over time, started to question the stories that he was telling. So this is my conversation with Anders Bolling. He is, if he lived in the US, he would have had 20 years at like the New York Times or something like that. But that's sort of the level of the newspaper that he worked for in Sweden. And a few years ago, he decided to leave after, reporting for them, editing, doing all of the very high level jobs at a very mainstream, very well-respected publication in his country. And he now covers all the things. He covers consciousness. He covers ancient civilizations. He has a great channel and podcast called Mind the Shift that I was on a couple months ago. Recommend you popping onto YouTube and finding our conversation. I've really, really liked talking to him. And I wanted to have him on, not because he is a quantum biology expert. In fact, he's just putting the pieces together with all of his consciousness research and the quantum biologic framework. And he's like, whoa, there's so much here, which is really cool. But I wanted to have him on so that we could understand how the lens of a journalist works. And he's really funny. He says that journalism really suffers from what he calls a misery bias. I'm like, oh, that's so good. Totally. So anyway, we get into the misery bias. We get into his journey from, a very, very traditional role to a very, very non-traditional role, and how that can impact society and impact the world, and indeed impact all of the things that we're doing, trying to shift paradigms and shake things up and live in a world that's a little more open to new ideas. So enjoy this conversation. Anders is super interesting. And I think we're going to do a live event together. So if you're not on our email list, go to qbcpod.com and put your email in, because Anders and I will be doing a Q&A in the not too distant future That's going to be on the topic of, how to talk so journalists will listen. He's involved in an organization that helps researchers understand how to communicate with journalists in a way that where they will not get dismissed, and the journalists will understand how to cover them and how to bring some of this newer information into the media world. So it's really an amazing and important bridge that he's building. And I was really excited to talk to him about it. And so, yeah, we'll be doing that live. Sign up for the email list if you would like to attend that and get the link and the information, which I'll be sending out soon. Okay. And please don't forget to visit our wonderful brand partners at bondcharge.com. So you can get anything that you need to really facilitate circadian optimized lifestyle there, from blue blocking glasses to little red night lights to infrared blankets, all of the things. It's like a one-stop shop. They have really nice quality stuff. If you're in the US and you have a health savings account, you can use that when you buy stuff at bondcharge.com. And you want to put QBC in the code at checkout to get a little discount. All right, enjoy. Anders Bolling, welcome to the QBC podcast. I am really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you for having me. Me too. I'm also looking forward to this conversation.
So we had a delightful discussion when I was on Mind the Shift recently, and I sent that link out to my audience, and they were all very excited to find your show. The type of thing that they all really appreciate. So I wanted to dive into your story because on this podcast, we talk to a lot of doctors and health professionals who have broken out of kind of the mainstream, infrastructure that they came up in, whether it's allopathic or even alternative, right? There's just so many new paradigms of health opening up that we tend to talk to people who are breaking out of whatever it was that's no longer serving them or answering their questions. And you have done you've been on a similar path, but in the area of journalism, and which I think is crucial because that is how we learn, we get all of our information, most of us. So tell me a little bit about what kind of journalism you did when you were a quote unquote regular journalist, and then we'll sort of explore where you are now.
Sure. Thank you. Yes. Well, I trained to become a journalist when I was in my 20s, and I really looked forward to doing that. I had been looking forward to becoming a journalist since I was, I guess, 15 years old or something like that. I read, when I was a kid, I read these comic books with the hero was called Tintin. I don't know if you have that in the States. You do, I guess. It's a Belgian series. Anyway, he was a journalist, but he was always on all these fantastic adventures all over the world. So it looked really cool. And he never wrote anything that I can remember. Didn't write any articles, so it seemed like a very interesting life. So, and when I was like 7 or 8 or 9 or something, I wanted to become a discoverer of the world. But then I realized, every landmass has already been discovered, so I can't do this. I have to do something else. Anyway, so that's the background. And I wanted to become a journalist, but I took a couple of gap years to travel before I studied, and then I became a journalist. And I got this job at the biggest morning newspaper in Sweden. I'm living in Stockholm, Sweden, Northern Europe. After having had brief sojourns at other outlets, I ended up Dagens Nyheter, Daily News, biggest newspaper. So I was there for 22 years as full-time with a full-time job there. I had been there a couple of times before, just briefly, but then 22 years.
Okay.
From 1998.
So you were employed full-time as a newspaper journalist for over 20 years.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
At a major,
I had
major Swedish publication.
Okay. Exactly. I had different kinds of jobs. I was a reporter. I was an editor. I did different things, but I was there for 22 years. Yes.
So did you cover all kinds of different things, like
I did.
politics,
I
culture,
did.
all
I
the things?
I was always, as we might come back to, I was always interested in the deep questions in life. You know, the big questions: who are we, where do we come from, and all that. And I had a spiritual streak, a spiritual orientation already from childhood, but I kind of kept that under wraps because I kind of sensed that that wasn't really what you could talk about openly. But I've always been interested also in what's happening in society, foreign policy, economics, science, all kinds of stuff. So I wrote about all kinds of stuff, and when I was an editor, I was working with other reporters writing about these different kinds of things, the environment. But I also wrote some you know columns, more
Mhm.
personalized things where I shared my look on things, my worldview. So that was kind of nice. And then I had a blog for 5 years. I ran a blog called the Progress blog, which was aimed to describe the world in brighter colors than we normally do in news journalism, because it's and it was tied to a book that I wrote in 2008, and it came out in 2009, and it was called The Cozy Darkness of the Apocalypse. So that's where I kind of my first, kind of what's the word, when I dealt with news journalism, and I had struggled with it
Mhm.
within, and so I had many things to say about it, and I was critical to the misery bias that is kind of in the dramaturgy of news journalism. So I wrote a book about that, and where I also displayed, so many facts, waves and waves and waves of facts showing that the world is not as bad as we think it is. And it was about the environment, about violence, and about poverty uh, broadly. And then it was kind of in detail as well. And I also speculated what this misery bias is, what the causes are behind this misery bias, and there are all kinds of explanations for it. It's a human trait, because I think we have
Mhm.
in the lizard brain, this tendency to, or we're prone to search for a scan for danger, and that was probably a useful trait 10,000 years ago, or 100,000 years ago, when our ancestors lived in caves and there were different dangerous animals around, and wildfires to keep track of, and all kinds of stuff. But it's not really useful in our day and age, in this society where, I mean, day-to-day life is hardly ever lethal. I mean, the dangers are
Right.
not lethal, but we still have this tendency
But
to look for.
if you just read newspapers and that's it, you stayed alone in a room, you never went out, you only read newspapers, you would not know that we are not, generally speaking, on a day-to-day basis under threat. It would feel,
Exactly.
the newspapers make us feel that misery bias. I love that term. That's absolutely what it is.
Yes, and I also talk
Okay,
about the
so
misery threshold, the threshold
mhm.
over which I mean, where we start talking about misery and bad things. It gets lower and lower all the time. If we go back 200-300 years, it was probably a much higher threshold before people actually thought that something was a big problem. Probably, it had to be large catastrophes, big wars, and stuff like that. We still have that. That's for sure. But I mean, newspapers can make war headlines out of things that are far less dangerous today. So
Yeah.
we lower the misery threshold.
It's interesting. I really noticed that living overseas, because I lived in places and a few different times there were major events happening that were in the area that I was living in that had headlines, global headlines. And I would get messages from people. Like I lived in Paris or near Paris during when there was that attack in the nightclub in the Bataclan. When
Oh yeah,
um
2015, I think.
yeah, it was 2015 because we just moved there, and it was a terrible incident. It was major terrorist incident. However, I had people for days and days reaching out, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And outside of the 1 block radius where that terrible event occurred, I was like, yes, I'm in the grocery store. I'm buying my groceries. And so, life was going on, but it was interesting to me because the entire perception of all of, oh, you're in France, you must be living through this
Hell,
terrorist event. And it was
yeah.
like, because that's what everyone's focus was on, their attention was on, and they connected those two things. And I just thought, isn't this interesting? Like, how often have I done that where I've just painted an entire region based on one incident that's getting my full attention and the attention of the world?
Yeah, it's very healthy to be out abroad sometimes and see it from that perspective, and also read foreign newspapers, what they write about your own country. Because, as you say, I mean, when I was at this big newspaper in Stockholm, we wrote stuff about what was happening. Because there is a narrative. We don't have to go into the politics of everything, but there is a certain narrative that is told, that we are told in the Western world, and there's a slightly different narrative about the world told in Eastern Europe and in Russia and in China, and as we all know, so different narratives. And I tend to think that there is some truth to all of them, but they're not. None of them is entirely is the whole truth, so to speak. So there was a lot of kind of from our perspective, self-evident things to say about Hungary and Turkey and countries like that. But then it's interesting to read or get to know what the newspapers in those countries write about Sweden and things that are happening in this country. And it's kind of, people get they feel attacked, because I mean, personally, when they read these things, but no, that's not me. That's not my country. That's not what's happening. You don't know what's happening here. It's nothing dangerous. But they are focusing, of course, on certain things that are happening in this country and that are in some countries get to be very big headlines. Like we have this gang violence, you might call it, it's gangs of youngsters, mainly young people who have come from other countries, from countries in the Middle East and Somalia and stuff like, and places like that. And there's some kind of a turf war around, the cocaine and the drugs trade. And for some reason, they've started using guns here. It's really bizarre. And I'm not denying that this is a big problem. It is a big problem. But it's not affecting everybody here. I mean, if I didn't read about it in the newspapers, I wouldn't know it was going on. I'm living in Stockholm. I know there have been many shootings in this area, in the suburbs of Stockholm. I've never heard a shot being fired once. And so, I mean, it's the same thing. But then if you think about it, I mean, why wouldn't these countries, the newspapers in those countries, write about Sweden in that way? It's logical. If we pick up some problem that's happening there, it's both a bit sad and a bit funny and a bit ridiculous that we look upon each other in this way, how we cannot see the whole story and the whole truth and just try to be neutral about things. And it's there's a lot we could say about, for instance, what's happening in Ukraine and all that. I don't think we should dive into that, but it's fascinating. I try to stay as neutral as possible in all these matters. I'm still interested in the news. I try not to follow the news as much because I kind of was marinated in it for so many years. So I mean, to stay sane, I need to stay away from the news. I don't listen to it 24/7 like I did, but I kind of check, the headlines and read a couple of articles every day, so I know what's going on in the big picture, and you can't miss the big things, of course. But I try to stay neutral. And it's incredible how people, crawl into their different boxes and just see the world from one perspective. It's so polarized. I don't know, and that's something that, I mean, my credo has been for many years that the world is better than we think. But this is actually something that's being accentuated lately. This polarization. I wonder why that is, because I always say that these opinions that some people are shocked that they exist now, they have always been there. I would say that. I think they have always been there, but they haven't been able. They haven't. People have always had different views on things, but now they're so. It's so easy, to express them by way of social media and all kinds of alternative media and all that. So we can see it. We can see it being said and being expressed, and I don't think people should be so shocked about that, because we're different. We're 8 billion different angles on reality, and we should respect each other and listen to each other. And we don't have to agree with each other, absolutely not. But we should kind of be better at listening to each other and trying to understand what the other person means when he says or she says certain things, because it's sometimes like people are just shut down when they hear that somebody is on a particular political spectrum. They just shut down all,
Yeah.
ability
No,
to
I
think.
think we've been encoded in some way to trigger a shutdown upon hearing certain words, the names of political parties, the names of certain politicians. I tend to avoid saying them because I want this podcast to like transcend politics.
Yeah,
Everyone's in the quantum field, right? Everyone has mitochondria. We all deserve to know. So, and I feel
right.
like as soon as you say certain things, we've been programmed, right? You hear a certain word, a certain name, or someone says that they're affiliated with a certain party, and it's like boom, the 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 mind closes, and you
Yeah,
feel almost triggered, like, oh, like a betrayal. Like I was listening to this It just happened to me yesterday. I was listening to this coach who I really like. She was sharing all this stuff, and then she said something about her feelings on a political situation, and I just felt myself go, and I felt betrayed because it was different than mine. Oh my goodness!
oh,
Like,
we have all these
we're so
preconceptions, and
programmed.
yeah, we're programmed. It's sad, but it's also very interesting.
and
But I
and then
think it's part of the, sorry, part of the health. It's part of our health, actually. I mean,
yeah,
your podcast is all about health and quantum health, and which is wonderful. And I think what we're discussing now is actually part of that, because
yeah,
being healthy is also about being able to see the whole world, and also to be able to dare to, question things, and speaking your own truth and all those things without fear, and not being so, we're so scared of being on the wrong team or being on the wrong side. Or it's not that we're only humans and we're only people, and it has to do with our health, because if we kind of block ourselves from certain parts of this reality, we I think we end up blocking also energy energy lines, energy fields in our bodies, and I think it's bad. I think we should be
yes,
open.
yes. No, I completely agree, and that's why I wanted to talk to you, because we don't. I think even the categorization of physical health and mental health, I think those categories are fading away. Just like politically, the left and right is starting to be meaningless. Like these compartments that we've been trained to put everything in are no longer valid. They're no longer useful. And so, if health is just health, spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, psychological, then how we process information, which is in large part through media, whether legacy media, traditional media, social media. Um, we need to understand how to do that without going crazy, without getting triggered, and with a level, as we were talking about before, with a level of discernment. As we're moving into this new media landscape, and you've been on the forefront of that. You were at traditional newspaper, then you did a blog. Now you have your YouTube channel, where you get to cover whatever you want because it's yours. But thousands and thousands of people are doing that, so it's become a very busy media landscape. We used to have like
To
four
say the least,
choices,
yeah.
and now we have like 4 million choices. So, talk to me about that word discernment, and how in this new landscape where there are so many more choices, there are so many people like yourself, right, who have been trained to deliver information and are choosing to do it in a new way, versus people who just are like, I'm just going to turn on the camera and start talking. I've never done this before. That's all good too. It's all good. But how do we make sure that we are, I know we can't really make sure of anything, I guess, but how do we practice discernment in this very crowded media landscape, would you say?
Very good question. I'm not sure I have a wise enough answer to that question, but it is, as you say, I mean, the landscape is so broad now, but it's also, it's like everything that happened, the big changes that happen, they contain both opportunities and threats. It's like the old saying that the Chinese sign for crisis is comprised of the sign for, or the character for what is it now? Threat and opportunity. I think it's threat and
Right.
opportunity.
Yes.
This is the definition of a crisis. So there's always an opportunity in this myriad that we see, myriad new outlets that we see and can access. But I think the internet in general is such a big opportunity. I tend to think of it as kind of the approximation of the Akashic records, the 3D version of the Akashic records. It's kind of it's totally a nice try, but it's that we're not really there. But I mean, because for real, it is actually very, very easy now for people. I mean, despite the attempts at censoring people and stuff like that, it is very easy to find very, very interesting information about things that you will never actually learn in the legacy media, or very seldom at least. You can hear about those things in alternative media perhaps, but I think it's actually, of course, people say, I don't have time to check everything up. I need the media to tell me what's true and what's not true. But I think that time is over. The time when we could rely on authorities to tell us what is true and not true, the time when we relied on authorities to tell us what's happening and not happening, and what we should do and not do, and what we should vote for and not vote for. I mean, if you go back 50, 60 years, people tend to romanticize that time and say, oh, it was much more calm, the society was calm, and everybody agreed on everything. But that was not, I think that's actually a false narrative. I think it was more like people just assumed that authorities were trustworthy, they were to be trusted, because people didn't think for themselves as much. It was more hierarchical in that sense. And you went to a doctor, and the doctor told you what you were sick of, and you just accepted that. People don't do that anymore. They kind of want a second opinion, and they think for themselves, and they're skeptical, and that's a good thing. It makes the world a messier place and a more complex and confused place. But I think that's a necessary process. And same with what you read in the papers and hear on the TV news or whatever. Check it up for yourself if you can. If you have the time, just go to the internet and search. Try to find the primary sources for everything, if it's possible. Because it's oftentimes not as simple as you were being presented it to be when it comes to science, for instance, or health, or the UFO phenomenon, which I have lately been very interested in, or there are so many things happening. So discernment, that's one thing. I mean, that's the practical way of looking into things for yourself, but also trust your own judgment, because we are all, if I am to be a bit esoteric now, we are all aspects of source, if you will, and we have much greater capacity than we are led to believe if we just listen to our inner voices and our higher selves and sit in stillness 5 or 10 minutes now and then, and just let things sink in, and don't think actively about them with your brain, but just let them sink in. And then oftentimes when you come out of that still little period, you have better discernment, actually, just by doing that, just by meditating a little bit, or just by not doing anything for 5 minutes. It helps. I think that's a good practice. I try to meditate every morning, or I do, but not every meditation session is extremely deep. But most of the time, it's really, really good. It makes one start the day in a much on a much better and calmer note than if you don't do it. So
Yeah.
some
Yeah,
tips.
and I think that's really wise to approach the media that way. And for myself over time, I can now, it's, like it's super clear to me when the headline or the has an agenda of some sort. And so then it's like, okay, well, take that with a grain of salt, take that with a grain of salt. And then you finally find someone who's covering it in a somewhat neutral, or at least maybe with a different agenda. So they're highlighting a different aspect of it. And you really have to like put all these puzzle pieces together and see the voices that come through who are most often dedicated to really just wanting to know what's happening and not to as driving a bias in some sort of direction. And yeah, it's a journey.
It's a journey. It's also you have to also respect. I mean, everybody. We are all human. We're all human, and I've been, as I said, 22 years at this big newspaper. And I can add, by the way, that the blog that I had was actually within that newspaper, so that was a nice thing that I was able to have it on there. But so I know the drill, so to speak, and I know how people tend to. And this is natural. It happens in every workplace. There is a certain amount of groupthink, and it's not very good, but it's natural. I mean, it's explainable. It happens. So it's not that it's if you find certain media outlets being not trustworthy, not reliable, especially not reliable. Certain media outlets, perhaps you have to respect that people working there, or most of them are not. I mean, they are convinced that they're doing a good thing, and so it's just hard to just go against the stream sometimes. And well, there are certain narratives, and there's a lot of narrative. I mean, science, for instance. I'm also now engaged in an organization called the Frontier Journalists Network, which is something that your listeners might be interested in checking out, perhaps. And we are it's a very small organization still, but we want to convey to journalists around the world the science, the research that is happening at the interface, or the nexus, if you will, between science and spirituality. And there's a lot of things happening there, which is exciting, actually, not least the research on consciousness and what consciousness is. And it's getting closer and closer and closer to, I mean, the mainstream science neuroscientists are getting closer and closer and closer to spiritual traditions that have been there for thousands of years. And it's really exciting. And this is actually happening. It's not, I mean, it's peer-reviewed papers, but this has not sunk into the mainstream media yet. It will. Mm-hmm. I've written a couple of articles, and I'm very grateful that I've been able to publish one big, long read in a mainstream news magazine here in Sweden about the latest findings in consciousness research. And but there is going back to this groupthink and the narratives that we're being told for decades and decades. This is a good example of that, because journalists they tend to stick to what is the mainstream view in certain all kinds of areas. A few of them can sometimes take a detour and write a column about some new woo-woo study or something. But the big news articles are mainly following the mainstream path. But that is actually moving now. It's a moving target. But most journalists don't know that yet. So it's difficult to. It's not really fair to blame the journalists for not being on the front on the the cutting edge of this development here, because they will eventually, but there is an inertia.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, because I really think, we get so mad at the bureaucrats and the politicians and the journalists, but I'm not sure, I don't think it's the people who are terrible. I think it's the systems
Yeah,
that have terrible incentives. So, someone was saying, like, who are all these incompetent people? Like, why can't they hire better people? And I'm like, they're probably fine. They probably have the potential to be highly competent, but bureaucracy incentivizes incompetence,
yeah,
right? And politics incentivizes corruption, and the medical system incentivizes treating symptoms with drugs.
yeah,
And we just kind of lean into it. And so what I hear saying for journalists, it's like you're incentivized to stay in the boat and not rock it.
mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
is the
Which
punishment for that losing your job, losing your reputation, right? Because I know people who are like viscerally terrified of touching a woo-woo subject
yeah,
because they really think it will destroy their credibility.
they want to. They don't want others to put the tinfoil hat on their heads.
Yeah.
They're terrified of that. I can understand that, but I'm out of that now. I don't care anymore. I care a little bit, but not too much, because I haven't. I mean, I've been a freelancer for 5 years now, and I've been out there so much, and I know that I have a soul family all over the world
Yeah.
that thinks and feels the same way that I do. So I'm fine. But if I were still in that situation, I would probably feel a bit scared about that. Yeah, because everybody wants to be in the group on the right side, on the the sane side of things. And this is the UFO phenomenon is the same thing here, actually. But what's good about it is that it's being discussed in Congress. I mean,
Yes.
these are
Okay, let's
people,
unpack that one. What do you see happening with that topic right now?
well, people who have been working in with both in the private sector and in the public sector with security on a high level. They've been working in the military. They are trained officers who have worked for many years in the military's special operations, and have come to work with these very secretive, these covert operations that have to do with retrieving unidentified anomalous phenomena, craft, ET craft probably, and transporting them to certain facilities where they have been certain special people have tried to reverse engineer those craft. And this has been going on for probably 70 to 80 years. And this is what you hear in congressional hearings now. There have been two of those, one in 2023 and one last year.
So that's where you have members of Congress sit and listen to the testimony of people participating in the activities you just described.
Yes.
Okay. And so this is on the record.
This is on the record.
All right.
And it's been, and some of the mainstream papers, they have written about these hearings, of course. I mean, that otherwise would be really strange. They have, but it's like they don't really believe it anyway. It's like it's too far out. So they have to, add some kind of, they have to formulate it or word it in a way that it's a little bit tongue in cheek sometimes, perhaps, or always end the articles with a little bit of skepticism. But it's more and more, it's coming out there more and more. And I mean, I don't know about this latest administration that is now in place in the United States. It's very early to say what's going to happen with many things around that. But anyway, this is one of the things that they have said. People in that administration have said that they will disclose what has been going on in this area. And so it's very, very interesting times. And if you're really into the woo-woo stuff and listen to, people who are channeling and stuff like that, which I do sometimes, I find it very fascinating. I can't say that I am convinced that everything that is actually an extraterrestrial entity that communicates through a channel, but doesn't really matter, because what is being said is often very wise and often very interesting. And some of those people have been saying that this is the time of disclosure, and we are soon going to see actual craft hovering above cities, and people are not going to be able to deny that they're actually there. So we will see. We had this, so-called the drone crisis in New Jersey and some other places, mainly over New Jersey, and they were. This is still a very, very unsolved matter. It's been, dismissed by the authorities as no, it's totally fine. It's just drones, but there is a lot of video footage from not only civilians but from mayors and from police officers that show, that this is not just ordinary drones. Some are, but not all of them. There is something strange going on there. Now, I don't know. Maybe it's all man-made, but then they have to because these craft are moving in such strange ways sometimes that they have to. In that case, if FAA has authorized all these operations, they have to explain what's going on. Otherwise, we don't. It is something fishy going on. Maybe it's not ETs, but it's in that case it's something else.
At the very least, it's advanced technology that nobody has acknowledged exists.
Exactly.
Whether it was made on this planet or somewhere else.
Yeah, maybe it was made on this planet, but with technology that we have retrieved from
engineered from retrieved.
Did you hear this or these interviews and these episodes on News Nations with the journalist Ross Coulthart, who interviewed Jack Barber?
Yes.
You did.
It's funny you bring it up. I just listened to it 2 days ago.
Okay.
Because I heard someone on YouTube talk about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And wasn't familiar with News Nation as an outlet. I thought they did a beautiful job covering that story and respectfully, and treating all of their interview subjects respectfully, but also not sensationalizing it and jumping to conclusions, just staying with the facts as they were being related and what they could back up with video. And I thought they did a really nice job.
Me too.
Journalistically speaking.
Of course, I understand Ross Coulthart had vetted this man, Jake Barber, and some other people that were on his show as well for a couple of years. So he really, he really worked a lot beforehand to make it possible. Because he's a serious journalist, and this is a good thing with journalism. It should be like
and
this.
that's what I think. That's what I was picking up on. I'm like, this just has a depth to it. These people, these producers and these journalists have done their homework. They really, really, it felt connected to the material. They had researched every piece of everything that they were presenting to the audience. It was. And so now you're telling me it was years of research.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Jake Barber has also requested to be testifying before Congress as well. So he's working on that. And he has this group of people who in an organization called Skywatcher, I think, or Skywatchers.
Yeah.
And they are people like himself who have been working in these covert operations concerning these UAPs and the retrieval programs. And they say that they will try, and they are certain they will succeed also to summon these craft within the confines of this organization, Skywatcher, and be able to retrieve them and to because that's you heard the interviews. Part of this is actually has to do with consciousness, and this is the part, as Ross Coulthart pointed out, this is probably the part that people have the hardest time wrapping their heads around, because they're not used to talking about consciousness, and especially not in combination with practical things like technical things and science and all that. But it all goes together, of course. Consciousness is part of it. And as far as I understand, Jake Barber and these teams that are working with these retrieval programs, they have certain groups that are psyops. They're psionics. They work with psionics, So it's
Oh,
kind of,
that's right.
yeah, parapsychologically, they have extra
They have
sensory,
like a team of psychics.
like a team of psychic. Right. Yeah. Thank you. I was trying to find the right words there.
No, but that's not what they call them. You're right. They
No,
call them
psionics.
psionics. They had a
Well,
special military word so that it doesn't
yeah,
sound like team of psychics, except that's what it
exactly.
is. Okay.
But they actually contacted these crafts by way of consciousness in some way. So they that's why, because you can maybe think that, well, if they're so advanced and they come here from another star system, and why would they, I mean, why would they do something as stupid as, crash their, why would they craft crash on Earth? It sounds really, not very advanced. But maybe that's not what's happening. It's more like they are being summoned. So anyway, if this group, Skywatcher, or organization, or whatever it's called, I think it's a company really, but it doesn't matter, if they're able to do that, and then to present these parts of craft or whatever they get hold of, that would be really, really interesting. Pretty difficult for I guess journalists to just dismiss. So we'll see. I think this year is going to be interesting. More things are going to be revealed, I think, in that area.
Yeah, I think so too. I get my information from a similar way you just described. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, a
Yeah,
little.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, what are the, and that seems to be a common thread, is that these next couple of years are just, there are going to be so many shifts in how we see things. It's just going to be impossible to maintain the status quo. And I feel, and I'm curious what your experience has been. I feel that a lot of us have been called to step into these quote unquote alternative spaces and start laying the foundation, so that when these shifts do happen, there's some
A
projects
place
in
to go for the
place.
people who are
Yeah,
confused.
something in place for people, for all of us to grab onto. Like, do you feel that sense, or what's your
I feel the
experience
same
been
way.
like?
Yeah, I feel the same way. May sound a bit pretentious, but it's not. I don't think it's that. It's just because in many ways it would have been easier to just stay in the mainstream and do what everybody else does. But I never really felt at ease, or I didn't feel comfortable, and I didn't understand what it was, because I had this fantastic job at this fantastic workplace, this big newspaper, but it didn't. It was something told me that I'm not sure I'm supposed to be here. And then it's a personal thing also, because me and my ex-wife, who's now still my best friend, we meet all the time and we discuss these kinds of things also a lot. So it was a very beautiful, loving divorce that we that we decided to have there 5 years ago. And so all this happened at once. We separated, and I quit my job. My father died, and I started this podcast, and so it all happened at once. So there were a lot of things happening. So there was some kind of maybe it was a Saturn return in my life, if you know about that.
Mm-hmm.
Every 29 years. So I was 58, then was I 57 or something? I don't know, something like that, 56 maybe, but somewhere around there. There was something telling me that if I don't do this now, then when? Because I got an inheritance and a little bit like that. And when we sold our house, we made some money on that. So I had some extra money, and I thought, so if I'm going to quit, I better do it now, because this is the best time.
Right.
So I did it.
It's like there's no more real world reasons. It's like, oh,
No,
well,
there's no
I
more
need the
real
paycheck. I need to
reason.
pay my mortgage. It's like,
And I can,
okay,
exactly. And then
okay,
when that
Anders
happened,
Soul.
during that period, I was very grateful that there were people like yourself and others on YouTube and on alternative platforms that could talk about deep stuff that I was pondering at the time, that I didn't find anybody talking about that in the, on Swedish national radio or in the newspaper. So I already back then, I mean, it's not very long ago, but it's growing even more. So I think you're right to your point there, that people like you and me, I think we have a role to play there. When it's going to become even more confused and chaotic out there, which I think it will.
Yeah.
In many ways, I don't think we're going to have more violence and stuff like that. People are scared of that. I don't know. Of course, I know as little as anybody, but my sense is that it's going to be kind of messy, but not really dangerous. If you see what I mean. So people are going to
Yeah.
perceive things as dangerous, but they're not really. It's just that things are handled in a different way than they used to be handled, and old paradigms are shattered, and old ways of organizing science, nations, economies, politics are changing. And if people always get scared when this happens. I just think it's from the place where I am now. I just think it's very, very interesting. Actually, it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be very interesting, I think.
This is true. We what's that? I think it's also a Chinese proverb. May you be born in interesting times, but it's kind
Exactly.
of a curse.
Exactly.
We're in it because I think messy is a good word. That's the sense I'm getting, and that's what I'm starting to see. Like a maelstrom, right? Like there's just it's it's like the zone is being flooded with messages and information, and this is happening. No, that's happening. No, that's wrong. No, this wrong, and it's becoming it's not clear, and that part of us that wants it to be clear. Is this disinformation or not? It's like, well, but what you always say is there's a golden thread of truth in everything. It's like, well, it's kind of misinformation, but there's something true about it. Right? It's like
Exactly.
that seems to be what we're coming up against over and over, and navigating through that for those of us like oriented towards truth is, it's exciting. I'll
It's
pick that word.
Yeah, it's exciting. And the golden thread of truth is a very good thing here to think about, because when you see that, if you can see all the pieces of information that you glean with neutral eyes, you will discern. You will be able to discern that there is, as I say, a golden thread of truth in everything, even the things that the mainstream might call this disinformation. But then you also realize that what you have thought for 30 years was the absolute truth was not the absolute truth, but it had a golden thread of truth in it, but it wasn't the whole truth. I mean, take history, for instance. It's kind of obvious these days that, I mean, more and more things are coming up about what's happened in history. And we haven't been told everything, of course. It's not strange, of course. I mean, if you take wars, for instance, that have been fought over the course of history, the winner writes the history. So there's another side to it, always, and has always been. So it's not. There's nothing strange in it. And some people might get nervous and feel uneasy when they realize that there is no such thing as one absolute truth, because there isn't. But to me, it makes life much more interesting and much larger. And it also has to do, of course, it ties in with what kind of worldview or life view you have. Because if you're a materialist and you believe that we are only biological robots with no purpose, we just have to do the best we can of this physical life, and then we die, and then it's all black, and there is nothing more, then you might get nervous about it. But if you have a different view and you realize that the essence of us, the core, can't die, it never dies. Consciousness is eternal. So we're just part of it. We're all together. We're all parts of the same, all-encompassing consciousness. Then it's just, this may sound almost preposterous to some people, but it's all good when you see it that way. It actually is all good. I mean, in essence. Then you can, of course, on the surface, when you day-to-day life and decisions that are being made and events. Of course, you can have opinions about them. That was bad. That was good. That was bad. That was good. That's how we operate. That's how we are human. But I mean, in the general, the big scheme of things, it's all good. That's the big secret of the universe, is that everything's going to be fine.
Yes. And we get to participate. We get to contribute to the type of consciousness that we're living in, the type of reality that we're living in. So your decision to leave mainstream media and start your own is contributing to a timeline where that exists. And then everyone who chooses, whether you do it in a public facing way or you just choose to put your energy on different types of things, like we're building the reality that we're going to be experiencing.
Yeah.
Or
yes.
Are experiencing.
Yes. I agree. I wonder what people, old colleagues of mine from the newspaper are thinking about what I'm doing, or maybe they're not thinking about it at all. Maybe they have just forgot about me. That's fine. But because I think I'm a person who's pretty difficult to pinpoint for people, because I'm still writing, pieces that are kind of, normal,
right,
about science and about the environment, and I get the thumbs up for that from the old guard.
Like, oh, thank God he did something that we can talk about.
And all of a sudden I read an article about the UFO phenomenon or about consciousness, and then I can imagine that some people go, whoa, he seems to have lost it. What's happened?
Oh, he's gone off the deep end again.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me, because it's like, and I noticed this doing research on all of these different, scientists and physicists over the last few years, psychologists, and so many of them were considered brilliant, right? And they won all the prizes, and they were like, all the medals, and they were the towering figure in their field. And then so many times in the bio I would read, it would be like, and then in the last 10, 15 years of their life, they went on, they got all weird, and they went down this weird woo-woo track. Yeah. They must have just got old and crazy. And it's like bio after bio after bio has some version of that. And I'm like, at what point do we say maybe all of these towering figures of intellect saw something once they, accrued all of their achievements and saw the end of their life coming and were ready to accept a larger truth? But every time, no, they just got old and crazy, and they write off the bigger, esoteric, more difficult to explain conclusions.
Yeah, I know. I've also seen what you're describing, especially on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is terrible when it comes to describing these kinds of scientists that are interested in esoteric matters. It's the worst. You know that there's a group called the Guerrilla Skeptics on Wikipedia, GSOW, I think it's abbreviated. And they are, there's a guy in California, a journalist I know a little bit, Craig Weiler. He has taken it upon himself to kind of expose this group, because it's an active group, and you can look it up on also on Wikipedia, actually. Because they're proud of what they're doing, and they are, materialist skeptics who are really, in this physicalist box, and they have, I think they actually believe that they are doing a very, very good thing for humanity, and so they go into all these articles about people like Rupert Sheldrake and Dean Radin and Pim van Lommel, and they just change things because they don't want. They want to, depict their research as pseudoscience. That's their task. So it's terrible. It should be exposed.
So Wikipedia is intentionally framing any of these more esoteric thinkers.
Yeah, well,
as crackpots.
Yeah, right. But Wikipedia is not this group. But the thing with Wikipedia is that it's kind of user operated. So I mean, they are kind of they have become admins of it, and you can become that. You can
Yes.
apply for that. But I think the founder, Jimmy Wales, is himself a materialist. I don't think he has openly said that I support this group and I like what they're doing, but I think he silently approves of what they're doing. That's my guess.
No, I think so. Based on my experience with Wikipedia and hearing stories of how political it is to even be able to edit on there. I mean, I know people. There's a journalist called Alex Berenson. He covered a lot during COVID and on the vaccines and everything. And I saw him, he wrote one time, he's like, I just gave up. My Wikipedia bio is garbage and there's nothing I can do about it. I can't get in there. I can't change it. I can't fix it. It's filled with lies.
Yeah.
And so I guess that, goes back to what we are talking about earlier, which is cultivating discernment. And especially when there's these intentional forces muddying the waters, because what you were saying and what your work covers is that there is a lot of quote unquote hard science behind so many fascinating things, quantum biology and consciousness and all of it. But then there are forces that are intentionally making it seem unfounded.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad. It makes you, of course, then become suspicious towards other topics as well. If you know that they're manipulating or doctoring information when it comes to science and spirituality stuff, maybe they have other groups doing the same thing on other topics. Probably.
Right, probably. And then this comes back to something else I wanted to ask you more about, because I what happens then, and I see this very often in the health sort of ecosystem, people become kind of bitter. They feel that they're being lied to. They feel that they're being betrayed, and they are. And it's just sort of, forget, everything sucks. Everyone's terrible. These people are terrible. And it can create a bitter, unhappy kind of way of life. And so I'm curious, your book was the cozy
darkness of the apocalypse.
The cozy darkness of the apocalypse, right? Which, and the point of that being that sometimes we feel more comfortable saying like, oh, everything's terrible.
Yeah.
Is that
right.
What was your premise there?
That's kind of the background to the title there.
Okay.
Trying to describe how we kind of what's the word, wallow in the misery in a way, because I mean we can all relate to, and it's probably ages old. You can imagine people sitting around a bonfire outside of the cave 20,000 years ago, and there's some person in the group there telling horror stories about saber-toothed tigers that he met on his hunts and things like that, and everybody was, oh, tell me more. So we love that, and people love also thriller movies and horror stories in novels, and it's very, very difficult to write. I've heard a Swedish author talk about this once and said that it's so sad that it's extremely difficult to write a truly happy story, because nobody really wants it, or nobody really is really interested in it, which is, I don't know, there's something something about the human condition,
right?
But then people have often also had these visions that they've talked about the global village, and I mean, I remember when I grew up, there were quite a few people who were kind of visualizing a world in peace and a world where we didn't have any borders, and I mean that's still possible. We're not dead yet. We're here. So why can't people have these visions? I don't really understand that. It's strange. To me, it's like I can sometimes kind of wake up in my waking state and be surprised that, firstly, I'm still here. I've been here always, because that's this sense that you have when you when you're in this life, and I think it's kind of a evidence or indication that you are eternal, because there's this sense that I've always been around. Of course, anyway. That's one thing, and the other thing is I kind of wake up and look around and think, what are we still doing this? We have nations, we even have wars, we have money, we have what is this? I mean, I've been having this, since I was a kid and back in the 70s, idea that it's soon going to change dramatically, and maybe I'm very special then. I might be strange, because to me it's been natural to think that way, that this world is one day we won't have any borders, we won't have any this or that, and no races, and not even any money eventually. We're just going to be here and do things, because that's why we're here, to do things and experience things together, invent things, have feelings. That's the reason why we're here. We're not here to build borders and governments and bureaucracies and civil servants and install these kinds of jobs that people have, meaningless jobs. That's not why we're here. It's crazy. Can't you feel the same way sometimes, that it's strange that we're still doing this?
Yes, especially on the bureaucracy front.
Yeah.
Because it just seems to perpetuate itself, and it's never going to solve. Bureaucracy doesn't solve problems. It doesn't.
No.
It doesn't have any vision. It's just,
and it's self-generating,
like a functionary, and it just exists to expand itself and take over. And but at the same time, I feel like there's always, where we are in our conscious evolution, we need a little friction. I mean, I've been pushed to do some of my best work when I've come up against really annoying people. But and then I'd break through with an idea I wouldn't have had without that person.
Yeah.
Or even the work we're doing now, if we didn't have that old way to push back on.
Yeah.
But then at what point do we not need that anymore? We can just sort of exist. Because I think, and we can wrap up on this topic. I think it's super interesting, like what's happening in the United States right now. So I'm Canadian. I live in the U.S., so I have this kind of front row seat, but I'm not involved. I can't vote. And I see, for just in the area of health, right? There's a new health and human services secretary in the United States who 5 minutes ago was public enemy number one, right? Talk about like jumping from mainstream to alternative, and
it happens fast nowadays.
Never know what's going to happen. But now I feel like, okay, we're in this place where we were just so angry, pushing back on the establishment, like, oh, they're so terrible, they're doing this stuff, they're doing that to us, and now it's like, okay, now we have the floor. It's like building or making the change or supporting people, and it's going to be messy because that person is right about food, but they don't know anything about this, and this person's talking about vaccines, but they don't know anything about light, and everyone's becomes territorial, and it gets really messy, and it's like, okay, now we are out in the in the ring, so to speak. We're no longer on the sidelines. And what are we going to do? How's it going to go? I don't know.
Well, like I said, it's very interesting. It's fascinating that it's happening. And I think that, like exactly as you're describing it, these people that are now being placed in different positions in this new administration, they're being vetted and they're being checked and they're being scrutinized much, much, much more than they would normally be in normals, quote unquote, or ordinary administrations, be it from the left side or the right side, doesn't matter. It's been more or less the same, regardless of party controlling it for 50 years or something like that. But now it is something different. It is something completely different. And people are freaking out because they don't know what's happening. They don't understand these people. They don't understand how people like this can be placed in these positions. So they're being vetted a lot. Maybe it's a good thing that they are, but anyway, it's really. And speaking of the secretary that you were just referring to, also in this country and in Europe, and I think all over Western Europe, and Americans should realize this, that what's happening now in the United States is so many people are watching this, and it's polarized here as well. Many people are freaking out and thinking that this is the beginning of World War III or something, and they're just horrified, and they are only reading the the newspapers that are depicting it in that way as well. So they don't get to really understand what could be said about it from the other side. But also a lot of people are hoping, putting a lot of hopes around this figure in HHS now, and because there was also a lot of controversy around the pandemic, the vaccines, the lockdowns, face masks, and all of those things here in Europe as well. Sweden was one of the few countries that didn't have lockdowns, which I was very grateful for.
That's right.
Yeah, that was a good thing. So we could
your poor guy who made that decision, he was like getting hammered. He stuck to it, didn't he?
Both and. I mean, he was also very adamant that the vaccines were the best thing that had happened since sliced bread or something like that. So I mean, he was I think he kind of felt that he had to be that, and he had to say those things. But when it came to lockdowns and face masks, he just followed the science, because it's common sense. We can't close schools. Why would you close schools when we have this infection that is 1,000-fold or 2,000-fold more dangerous for people over 70 than for kids? It's not dangerous for kids. Might be dangerous for 70-year-olds, and I mean, they should have the vaccine perhaps, but or whatever you should call it, the medical intervention, the experimental medical intervention. So but people are, as I said, also watching this very closely, even in Europe. So what is happening?
Yes. No, I there is an energy ball unfolding in the United States right now that is super fascinating, and I think will have ramifications around the world, and who knows what's going to happen or how things are going to play out. But I do feel like it's our time to step up, and what I hear you saying too is like, be flexible in how we take in information, be discerning, trust our own intuition. Like, how did this land? How did this make me feel? Am I feeling outraged? Or am I feeling like, oh, okay, that's good to know, like all these different things.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you would like to share before we wrap up? Anything that's coming to you?
No, just that emphasize what you just talked about here, that trust your own judgment and your discernment, and don't follow the news 24/7. You can follow it a little bit if you want to know what's happening, but not too much, because it's not good for your health. And also check things for yourself if you have the time, and think for yourself, and take some time off just to do nothing once in a while. 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, meditate, or just do nothing. It will be good for you, and you will have better discernment of what's going on out there in this messy time.
All right. Thank you. Very good advice. And I encourage everybody to check out Anders' podcast and YouTube channel. It's Mind the Shift on YouTube and on all of the places where podcasts are. And your website is AndersBolling.com.
AndersBolling.com.
Okay. So we'll put that link in the show notes as well. It's AndersBolling.com. Thank you so much for being here. We'll have to do this again. It was really fun.
Thank you, Meredith. It's been a true joy speaking to you today.
Yeah.
And thank you for what you're doing also with your podcast and the other work that you do.
Appreciate it.
You're still here. You made it all the way to the end of another episode. Thank you. I love that you're still here, and I really appreciate it. And I just want to pop in and let you know that after a lot of thoughtful consideration and over a year of trying this myself, I've decided to fully partner with a company called LifeWave with the patches. I have a couple of interviews with David Schmidt, the founder. If you want to go, if you haven't listened to those, highly recommend. And the reason I'm doing that is because I didn't think outside of the sun I would find anything that I would really want everyone to try. But I have. And this is a light-based phototherapy technology that I believe is just unlocking the potential of the human body that's waiting to be uncovered. And took me a while to get to this place and to truly appreciate what these patches do, but I'm here and I just want to encourage you to try them, especially if you have a longstanding chronic issue that hasn't fully resolved, even though you're doing all of the things, chronic injury, chronic pain, anything like that. Or if you are a woman over the age of, say, 45, definitely give the X39 a try. Just trust me. It's been, I won't share all the stories, but I give it a try. I have set up like a little email because I know my people and they always like to have all the research and all of the stuff before they buy anything. So if you go to qbcpod.com and click on patches, you can put your email in and it'll send you a note from me with links to research and the story of the X39 and like some details of how I use these things. So you can have a little more info before you dive in. But seriously, give it some thought. Again, I don't promote products lightly and I don't do it very often. And I purposely did not make it part of my business model. To be honest, this podcast doesn't really have a business model, but I am a convert. I'm all in on these things. And I just want you to know that they have my full support, not just as a promotional activity, but because I really, really think that they're changing people's lives. And I'd love for them to change your life too. So qbcpod.com, click on patches. See you next time.
This has been the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. To find a practitioner who practices from this point of view, visit our directory at quantumbiologycollective.org. If you are a practitioner, definitely take a look at the Applied Quantum Biology Certification, a 6-week study of the science of the new human health paradigm and its practical application with your patients and clients. We also love to feature graduates of the program on this very podcast. Until next time, the QBC.